So we are back with part 2 of lesson 2 of advanced server-side scripting. We've been playing around with closures, trying to get a sense of how they work, how they're really all about variable scope and managing scope, trying to keep from using global variables and trying to limit our variables to the most local scope possible, but also allowing us to share variables from a parent to a child function, so that we can use it in the kind of the narrowest way possible. So the link for this article on Medium is here. I do want to start talking a bit about NPM. So bear with me for a second. I got to get the proper slides up. This is not what I wanted. My apologies. Okay, so we went over the first part of this last week, but we do want to start looking at NPM, which is Node Package Manager, which we're going to use probably every class. So we talked a little bit about NPM last week. And that NPM is basically it's very similar to NuGet. So Microsoft's package library. In fact, NuGet is actually modeled on NPM. NPM is older. It's been around first. And it's basically a repository of packages. So third-party code libraries that we can browse, download, and install. So there's a CLI, command line interface for managing local and global packages. So we can go have a look at NPM. Now there are some other sites. There are some alternatives to NPM that you might hear about. One of the most popular ones is called Yarn. But for our purposes, we're going to stick with NPM. So let's say we want to do something like allow, let's say, I don't know, let's look for Google Maps. So we can search for a package. We get a bunch of different packages here. And NPM will tell us, oops, not sure what happened there. So it'll describe how many subdependencies this package has, give us a version, tell us when it was updated, tell us what packages depend on it. So if we install any one of these, we're going to get Google Maps API, tells us the command to install it, how popular it is. Typically there's documentation here, how to install it and how to use it. And the source code typically comes from GitHub. So we can go there, and oftentimes the documentation for an NPM package often lives on GitHub. So it'll tell us how to use it, and we can download direct from there, or we can do it from NPM. So the command to install packages from NPM is pretty simple, similar to what we did in the Visual Studio in the package manager. We just use npm I, or you can use the word install, npm I, and then the name of the package. There's never spaces in the package names. So if there are multiple words there, the convention is that the words are separated by dashes or hyphens. So we have two options when we install a package. If we install a package with the command npm I, it makes the package available in our current project. And we'll look at where those packages get saved. We also have the option to install packages globally. And for that, we would use npm I and then -G for global. So that would mean the package we can use in any node project on our machine. And there's a few packages we are going to want to install globally. These are like some developer utilities that just make our life easier. So we'll install those so we can use them for any one of our applications. We can uninstall, we can update a package to a newer version. And there's a file. So, installing one package is pretty simple, but most of the time in Node, we're going to have lots of packages. So we need some way to kind of manage them. So Node npm gives us this configuration file. It's a JSON file called, descriptively enough, package.json. And we'll typically see that in the root of the application. So it defines kind of some various things about our application, like name, version, author, and it will also list our dependencies. So to show you what this might look like, just go here, maybe. So here's a Node app some students have been working on. So here's the package.json. So our application's got a name, it's got a version, it has a startup script, and then these dependencies, these are all of the npm packages and the versions that we're using. So we're using things for parsing cookies, for managing sessions. Mongoose is our data access library. We're using Node Mailer for sending mail. We're using Passport, which we're going to use in this class for authentication. We're using Twilio for sending text messages. And then we have this dev dependency that we're going to use later called Nodemon. We're going to install Nodemon today as a global npm package. So here's a really simple version of the package.json file. It just has the name, version, a list of the dependencies. But there's also kind of a tool we can use at the command line that will automatically generate a package.json file for us. So if we run the command npm init, so initialize it, it'll give us a bunch of prompts and it will actually build the package.json file for us. So the window looks sort of like this. It'll ask us some questions about our app, which we can respond to, and then it will actually build out a package.json file for us. So we want to do this. So let's go to our code editor and let's open up our terminal. And again, it doesn't matter if you do this in a separate command or terminal window or you're doing it right within WebStorm or Visual Studio Code, doesn't matter. So I'll just type CLS to kind of clear out my terminal. So I'm going to run the command. Actually, first to make sure npm is installed. It should get installed automatically. If you have Node, you should have npm. But if you just want to check it, we can run the command npm -v. This will tell us what version of npm we have. And I'll also just put it in the chat here. Nice and simple, npm -v. Okay, so you've got a slightly newer version than I do. That's fine, doesn't really matter. So we want to use npm. Maggie, you've got 6.140, 10. Okay, so we're all similar. Mine's slightly older, no big deal. So I want to initialize, oh, you're on 7.3. Okay, so that may be a beta version even, but that's fine. No, it doesn't matter. You don't need to update it. So let's run the command npm init. Yep. So we'll run npm init. This utility will walk you through creating a package.json file. It only covers the most common items and tries to guess sensible defaults. If you want documentation, you can type npm help init for more descriptive documentation. And then afterwards, you can use npm install, which they've now shortened. You can just use npm I as a shortcut, and the package name to install a package and save it as a dependency. So our package name, so it defaults to the folder name, which is W21. So you can, if I want to change the name of my package, I could type a new name. If I want to accept the recommended package name, I can just hit enter. It recommends the version as 1.0.0, which I'm cool with. So I'm going to hit enter again. Add a description. Okay. This is our in-class Node app for COMP2106 winter 2021. You can put in any description you like. This is why I have to get out of bed on Thursday, whatever. If you hit enter, the description will be blank. Entry point. So this is going to be what's the startup file. If we start it, I think I'll actually use our server.js for this. Web server.js. Do I want to do this? Actually, you know what? No, I'm going to create a new file in a minute that we're going to call tax.js. Again, we can always modify this file after, so it's no big deal. The test command I'm going to ignore. This is for doing unit testing. I'll just hit enter. Git repository. I've already tied it to a Git repository. If you haven't tied yours to a Git repository, that's fine. You can just hit enter. Keywords. I don't know. Node, Express, Npm. Again, you can. These are optional. You don't really have to put in any keywords. The author. Just put in my initials. The license, so defaults to there's different options for different open source licenses. I'll just accept the default of ISC, and then it gives me a preview. So this is what package.json is going to look like. My application name, version, description, startup page, link to Git, if I have one, keywords. It's going to add this file to the project, so we can always make any changes we want to it. Is this okay? If I like the file, I can just hit enter. So now in my project, I now have package.json. And again, like I said, we can make any changes to it that we want. So we've used npm to initialize our package.json. We've set our startup, our main file is going to be tax.js. Well, we need to build this page. And then we want to run it. And then we're going to use npm to install some packages. We're going to install one package for use in this project specifically. We're going to install another package globally, kind of a developer utility that we're going to use in any of our Node projects. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new file here. I want to make a new JavaScript file. I'm going to make tax.js. This file is going to be kind of similar. I'll maybe close up most of my other files. The only one I'm maybe going to leave open, I'll leave package.json open. Okay, Maria, sorry, what did you want me to paste? Happy to slow down. I'm just not quite sure what you need. Okay, so the configuration you create, if you run the command npm init, it's going to give you a bunch of prompts to build this file. You don't have to build it manually. This utility is going to generate the file for you. So run the command npm init and hit enter. And then you're going to get a bunch of prompts in the terminal window asking you what values you want to put in the package.json. If you just hit enter to every question, that's fine. It will build a very short, simple package.json for you. I put in things like the author name and keyword and Git repository. Everything's optional. Okay, there's nothing critical. Doesn't matter if your package.json looks different from mine. Don't panic. Okay, Janelle, if you're not even getting Node, Janelle, were your files working earlier today? Were you able to run the files we built earlier? Okay, but today you can't run anything? Okay, if it's not and Janelle, are you in your C drive or are you working in a different drive? Or is it your C? Okay, so Janelle, if you run the command node space -v, you get an error or it says node is not recognized.
Yes, it says node is not recognized.
Okay, if it's not recognizing node, then I want you to run the node install again.
Okay.
And try it again and let me know what happens.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, for posting. So Nick's posted the full package.json. You can make any changes you like to that file. So this was the web server file we did last week. We're going to build a tax file that's similar to this, but then we're going to make it a little more advanced. We're going to use Node's HTTP library to create a web server. So like we did last week with our web server file, we'll require HTTP. Then we want to start the web server. So just like we did last week, we're going to call create server. And our create server method, it runs asynchronously. It takes a callback with 2 parameters. Does anybody remember what are the parameters used for the HTTP create server method? One's kind of an inbound and one's sort of an outbound. Yeah, request and response. Thanks, Hung. So we'll set our request and response. Thanks, Barak. You got it as well. So we're going to use these as an anonymous function. And just like we did last week, no, as soon as you shut the computer off, you terminate the server. It cannot run if there's no power. It's got to run in an active operating system. So first we're going to write a header like we did last week with a 200 HTTP status code. And we'll set our content type of text plain. And then to our response, we want to write an H1 tag, and we'll build the super sexy tax calculator. So we're going to render an H1, and then we'll end the response. So this will print an H1 to our screen. It'll send to 200 HTTP OK. And we want to listen for requests. We're setting up this event listener we talked about last week. I'm going to put in port 3000. Doesn't have to be, you can use any port number. Doesn't matter. But we're going to start using Express in a couple weeks, and 3000 is the default port for Express. So I'm kind of in the habit. listen for events, import 3000. And then let's just console log server running on port 3000. It's basically so far the exact same code as in our web server last week, except our response.write was a hello world message. Everything else, identical. So if you need the code from last week, it's on GitHub. You can just open up the webserver.js file. The only thing that's actually different is the message we're printing out here on line 10. Okay. Now, there's actually a couple of ways we could launch this. Two different commands would work to run the code. How could we start our server? What command could we use that would be similar to what we've been using so far? If I open my terminal, how do we get this server launched? Right, okay, yeah, so it would be node and tax. So we could try that. Right, my server is running on port 3000, which is good. And then if I jump to the browser, we can hit localhost 3000 and we get our H1 showing up. So it's working the way we intended so far. Now, one of the issues we talked about last week, so this is functional, but it was kind of inconvenient every time we wanted to make a change. What happens, so let's say we say, you know what, this H1, it's too big. We should shrink that down. So maybe I want to change my code to an H2. So I'm going to update my line 10, just going to change the 1 to a 2. I'm going to save my change. And then I want to go back to my browser, just shrink it down so we can see. So when I refresh, I think I've still got my H1. Right. So this becomes a big pain, right? We had to do this last week. I still have an H1. Yeah, I've got to stop the server and restart it. So what I want to do is we want to install an Npm package. We're going to install it globally. This package will watch for changes and will automatically do what's called a hot reload, right? So the application will restart anytime a change is saved. So right now, to get my H2, I've got to hit Control-C. And then I got to hit my up arrow to start it again. Now it shrinks. So I don't want to keep having to hit Control-C and run my start command every time. So we're going to use an Npm package to solve this problem. And the package that we want is called Nodemon, a simple monitoring script for development of a Node app. That's odd, Justin. It looks right. I'll put the code up again in a second so you can check. So Nodemon's really popular, 3.1 million downloads a week. It's a development tool, doesn't require any changes. It's just a wrapper. It replaces the node command. So the command to install it, And generally, we want to install it globally. We aren't just using Nodemon for this project. We'll want it for all our projects. You know, when you start working on an assignment or a lab, you're probably going to have a separate project. We want Nodemon to be available in all our projects. So we're going to use the -G flag to install it globally. So I'm going to hit Control-C. And I want to run the command npm I -G. I'll put this in the chat for you as well, Nodemon. Doesn't matter if -G goes before or after Nodemon. So I for install, -G for global, Nodemon. So I'll hit enter. And it's going to fetch a copy of the Nodemon source code from GitHub. It had a few optional dependencies, which we skipped. So I can see it's done. It doesn't take very long. Some packages are a lot bigger and they take a lot longer to install. Nodemon isn't particularly big. And we can see where it gets installed. Because I said global, on Windows, it gets installed to my user profile, app data, roaming, npm Nodemon. So any global packages will be installed here for me. Right? If we look at the project, we don't see any Nodemon file or folder here. It's installed into my user profile in my operating system. So what I want to try now is, instead of starting my application with the node process, which doesn't watch for changes, I want to start the application with Nodemon instead. And this way, if we make changes and save them, our application will automatically restart. So what we're going to do, I'm going to start it with Nodemon, and then I'm going to change my H2 to an H3. And if we watch, our application should do an auto restart. So I can just type Nodemon here. Now I don't even need to tell it which file to run. I could run the command Nodemon tax, but I could actually just, if I run the command Nodemon, it's still going to launch the tax file. How does my application know that this file, we've got about 8 or 9 JavaScript files. If I just call Nodemon, how does it know? I'm saying it's going to launch this file. Right, because in package.json, we set the main file as tax. It's absolutely, Justin. So I could put tax in the command here, but I don't really need to. Nodemon is going to go to package.json and it will just launch this as our startup file. So I'll run Nodemon and we get a bit of a different message. It shows us what version. It's watching star.star. So it's watching all file names, all extensions. So right now it's watching JS, MS, and JSON changes. So it doesn't watch, like if we change, let's say, an image file or a CSS, it's not going to do an auto restart right now. So it starts using tax.js. Good question. I'll come to that in a minute. It launches, and if I go back, yeah, so we'll have a look at that in a minute. Thanks, Justin, for posting that. So let's go, and now let's change our H2 to an H3 and watch what happens in the terminal. So I'll change my H2. I'm going to make it even smaller. And as soon as I hit Control S, Nodemon is restarting due to changes. I actually hit Control S twice. And now when I go and refresh, it's an H3. So in general, you don't have to use Nodemon, but it saves you a step. It saves you doing Control-C and then running the start command again. And so any changes we make from now on, as soon as we save them, Nodemon will do a restart. So Hung, the other thing is it depends what type of file it is. So if it's a back-end file, yeah, we can add other files. We can modify the list of file types that Nodemon is watching through the options, as Justin said. If you run Nodemon ---- help, we can see that. I guess I could stop it and we could have a look. And it actually tells me update available. So I've got, oh, that's weird. That message doesn't make much sense. It says 2.0.7 is available, but it already tells me I've got it. So notice when I installed it, I installed it globally. That's why. So I'm going to ignore that message for now. Let's run Nodemon ---- help. Okay, great, Janelle, thanks. Oh, whoops. Right, so if the script is omitted, it will try to read main, and without nodemon.json, it'll monitor those by default. So you can add a nodemon.json and you can specify other file types to watch if you want. Thanks for that, Justin. So I'm going to start my server. Whoops, I'm going to start the server again. Okay, Hung, yep. What's your question? Sure. We'll try to, if we can solve it quickly, we will. Yep. Okay, cannot find the module. Interesting. Okay. Yet your file is here. You know what the issue may be? You have spaces in the path. Many applications have trouble interpreting spaces because it's in your users directory, and I notice you've got a space in your username. So you may have to move this project into a path where there are no spaces. That would be one thing to try. That's the obvious thing I notice. So you may want to move the node folder like right into your root of C, for example. Try that and you can let me know if that resolves the problem. Okay, so let's go back. Let's keep working on this. Okay, so here's what we actually want to do with this page. We want to be able to pass in as part of the URL a numeric value, 100, 99, 99, whatever it is. And then we want to be able to calculate and display if that was like a purchase total, how much tax would that cost? 13%. And then what would the total be? And then we wanted this page to display all of the values. So we're going to add another reference here. So just like when we install Node, we get the HTTP library. We also get a library called URL. And it lets us do things like read parameters from URLs. So we'll create a variable called query. And we're going to call the parse method of our request URL. So this will give us this query string. So the parameters and values on the end of our URL. It's kind of like get in PHP, really. Which I know you haven't used for a while. So we'll create a variable called subtotal. So we want to read this value in the URL, and we're just going to store it in a variable. And then we want to calculate the tax and total based on the subtotal. So how would we figure out the tax value? If we've got a subtotal that's some kind of numeric value, how would you calculate tax? Don't think you need to worry about that, Justin, for now. So if we have a subtotal value of 100, how would we figure out how much tax to charge? What's the tax rate in Ontario? Yep, it's 13%. So just to get the tax itself, that's right, Aditya, right? We would just multiply subtotal, not exactly by 13, but by what? You guys are close. If we have a $100 purchase, right, thanks, Ivan, we'd multiply it by 0.13. Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Ivan. Yep, 13%. You got it. And now what about the total? Total should be a little simple. Math should be a little simpler. How do we calculate the total? A couple different ways we could do it. Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. We could just add them together. Okay. And now we want to just display all the values. So we'll use another, I will put all this code up. If you missed anything, don't panic. I'll do it in a minute, okay? So let's write out maybe an H4. We'll say subtotal. Subtotal. And maybe a space. And we'll output our subtotal here. And we'll end our H4. And we'll open another H4 and we'll insert the tax and one more. Displays the total. So one response that's going to display 3 H4s, and we need a plus sign here. So we want to show all the values in H4 tags. I'm going to save this. I will put it all up on Pastebin for you. We'll try it out. So if you need any of the code, it's here. So we've added the URL library. We're reading the URL parameters into a variable called query, and then we're extracting the value called subtotal. And then just doing a bit of simple math and trying to output all the values. So Nodemon has restarted everything. So I want to call this page, but I want to add on this parameter at the end. I want to pass in a numeric value and see if things get calculated and displayed properly. So here's the URL I'm going to go to. On the end of my URL, I'm going to put in a slash and then subtotal equals 100. And I'll put this URL in the chat as well. So this is what we get right now. It's kind of working. Our subtotal is right. Our tax is right. What happened to the total? 200. Tax is right. Aha. Yes, Ivan, as a matter of fact, they are. How come it shows as shows me it's 20,026 in this case? So this is getting concatenated like strings. How come? How come this one worked, right? It did the math properly, but this gets treated as a string. Why would that be? Right? How come, but why does it do concatenation? You're right, Maria, that is what's happening. How come it's treating these as strings? How does JavaScript handle variable types compared to a language like C#? What's the difference between the two of them in terms of how it deals with data types? Right, Hung, that's what we're talking about. We're looking at that total value. So the total that's calculated here, why is it concatenating these together, the total and the tax? Why isn't it adding them? Here's a hint. What's the difference between a strongly typed programming language and a loosely typed programming language? Again, that's why I use the comparison of C# to JavaScript. How do they treat variables? Okay, you're could be Maria. Good guess. I'll give you a hint. JavaScript is loosely typed. C# is strongly typed. What does that mean? We would have talked about this like back when we started our first PHP class, and it was a long time ago. Right, Ivan, you got it. So JavaScript is loosely typed, meaning the variable types are implicit, right? When we create a variable here, we're not saying whether this is a string or a number. Justin, that's for comparison. So yeah, if we wanted to compare two variables and the type, you're right, we would use triple equals for that. We're not actually comparing anything here, we're assigning variables. So JS is loosely typed. Variable types are implied. So C# is strongly typed. Variable types are explicit and can't be changed. So in JavaScript, we could declare a variable, set it equal to a number, then we could change that variable, set it equal to a string. C# won't let you do that. Once a variable is a number, if we try and put a string value in it, we're going to get a data type error. But JavaScript lets us do this. So the plus sign in JavaScript, right? This is both a mathematical operation for adding two numbers together, but it's also the concatenation operator for strings, as Maria said. So by default, it's treating, the plus sign is treating these values like strings. It's doing its best to guess, but it doesn't know for sure these are numbers. So there's a couple of fixes. How do we fix this to ensure it actually performs math here? There's a few different options we have to fix this. But if we just leave it up to JavaScript, it thinks these are strings and it appends them together. So we need to indicate somehow, no, don't treat these as strings. You need to treat these as numbers. So we want to make a small change. There's a few ways we could do it. Okay, Ivan, that's a good idea. If we call parse int, right, we're explicitly converting, except the only thing is rather than an int, we may want to use a float, because if it's an int, it will ignore any sense. It'll only deal with whole numbers. So let's try that with parse float here. If we explicitly make this a floating point number, then JavaScript may be smart enough to realize, oh no, these aren't strings, don't concatenate. We need to do an addition. So I'm going to save that change. We'll go back and check it out. Right. So that by parsing this to a float, now we're being explicit, hey, treat this as a number. Okay, so now it's basically working the way we want it to. Okay, so keep in mind, we're going to come across this kind of loosely typed nature of JavaScript sometimes, where it can cause problems. It won't give us errors when we do this with variables, but we don't necessarily get the results we want if we just leave it up to the JavaScript compiler to kind of interpret our variable types for us. This is one of the challenges with a loosely typed language. So now the values are correct, right? I put in 100. So this is working the way we want it to so far. Now it's 5 to 2. We don't have tons more to do with this, but we will take a break. We won't need a full other hour of class. But we'll need to deal with a couple things. So there's 2 things we should fix here in terms of formatting this page. If I don't put in a nice round number, like what changes should we make to clean this up? Okay. Yeah, we should be rounding the numbers. Agreed. Good suggestion, Barak. What else should we be doing in terms of kind of displaying this nicely? Yeah, we want to format these values as currency as well. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a break here. When we come back, we're going to install an NPM package locally into this project that has a function we can use that'll do both of those things. It'll both automatically round the values to 2 decimal places, and it will apply currency formatting for us. We could just do it in plain JavaScript, but we want to look at installing an NPM package locally and letting that package do the work for us. Okay, so this won't take us very long. Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back in 10 minutes and we will add that package. And then I can stick around after class for a little while if anybody needs some help. Okay, let's take a pause here. I will upload everything we've done so far.